Thanks, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you taking the time on what is really an important day to once again have the discussion about the things that we know are good for Wisconsin and the direction that we're moving Wisconsin forward. The Supreme Court today took up important issues, of course, that were before the court and issued opinions in all three cases. I think that it was pretty clear vindication of the work that the legislature has done. Act 10, the wording that we saw, of course, is that it was upheld in its entirety. There is no constitutional right to require people to be in a union. We know that that has been the law under federal statutes, and we now see that the Supreme Court in Wisconsin has ruled the same way. We know that the reforms also have proven what we have asked when we started the entire process to say the budget's balanced, people didn't lose their jobs, local governments have more flexibility, and services are still being delivered in the same high-quality manner they were before Act 10. Now the only ones left to understand this are some of the big union labor bosses and Mary Burke, who seems like she is clearly out of step with the legal arguments and where the public is on this issue. We saw also photo ID was upheld. I want to first thank the DOJ and all of the attorneys under Attorney General Van Hollen who have defended the lawsuit from the very beginning. They have worked with us to make sure we have constitutionality all throughout the process. We unfortunately still have a single liberal activist judge, Lynn Edelman, who has held up this from being enforced in Wisconsin, so it will not be enforced, of course, in November, which is unfortunate. The assembly version that we passed with a few minor tweaks literally was adopted, it seems, as if by the state Supreme Court. My preference always is to have the legislature make the changes to make sure laws are enforceable and constitutional, but in this case, because the Senate didn't act, the Supreme Court did. So either way, ultimately, we know that Wisconsin's legal system now also supports the idea that voter ID is constitutional. I think one of the best things that was said by Justice Rogensack in her majority opinion is that photo IDs are a condition of our times, and that's exactly right. You have to use them to buy a firearm, to get on an airplane, to rent a movie, to get a library book. It's something that's just a normal part of where we are as Wisconsin citizens, so having it as a requirement to vote now has an even lower threshold based on what her ruling is. We ultimately know the Seventh Circuit will rule on whether or not Judge Edelman's ruling is correct, and then ultimately it potentially will go to the Supreme Court where they've already ruled it's constitutional. So I feel very positive about that. Overall, I think today a really good day for conservatives in Wisconsin, and that's because of the hard work that we've done. The reforms are working, and now we just have to get to work on the remainder that's left.
Do you believe that the ruling in the voter ID case will help the state's argument in federal court as it goes forward with the appeal, and is there any chance that it would lead to, are you hopeful that it would lead to a stay of that decision so it could be in effect for the November election? I
would hope that that would be possible, but I think that Judge Edelman has said under almost no circumstances will he allow that to happen. So it really depends on how expedient the Seventh Circuit will be in taking up this case, and we just don't know. I would love to have photo ID in effect for the November elections. We've already done it once, and it worked flawlessly without any major complications. We know that under the ruling that they have given with the Supreme Court, anybody can go to the DMV and simply get an ID, not a driver's license, but they could get an ID. There are still some legal questions which DOJ is working through along with DOT. How will it work? What will the process be? Who will be allowed to get that ID? Because under the Real ID Act, in order to get a driver's license, you still have to have proof of citizenship, proof of your birth certificate or whatever. I presume that in order to get an ID to vote, you'd have to prove you're a citizen as well, but we don't know how that's going to work. So we'll have to wait and see how that happens.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is that part of the decision that said essentially DOT cannot require to get an ID to vote anything you have to pay for? Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think that's going to be troubling? Are you going to need to pass some sort of further legislation to address that issue?
It's possible we could come back and make some of those tweaks once we get past the election, but it's not going to be in effect before November because, of course, we're not coming back in. I do think that some of the requirements that we had in our assembly bill would have been preferable. So you could have gone to the polling place, you could have signed an affidavit, which would have been enforceable in court. I think that the way that the judges had to rule in this case creates a new process that we just don't know how it's going to work yet. Going to the DOT in the past, you brought your birth certificate, you were able to get a federally approved driver's license, so you could board a airplane, do all those things. Now, if you're not required to bring some of those documents, does that mean somebody who is not a citizen of Wisconsin or not a resident even could go in and get an ID because you don't have to prove anything? I don't think the justices were intending for that, and I certainly wouldn't support that. So there's still a little bit up in the air, but I think overall, I think Justice Rogensack and the majority, even swing Justice Crooks, found that voter ID is a easy process that we want to make a little bit easier.
Doesn't that open the door to voter fraud, the very thing you were trying to prevent?
It's got a potential for it, which is why we prefer to have the affidavit process where someone would be able to be prosecuted when they tried to commit voter fraud. Under this system, I don't think they precluded that from happening, to still have an affidavit or some side of process that we could prosecute people who commit fraud, but it's just too early to tell. So I look forward to working with the Walker administration once they're reelected. We'll come back and work with the Senate, make any corrections that are necessary, because of course there are other election issues that'll come up that we didn't finish this session.
Well, the affidavit would still require you to show a birth certificate or one of these items that costs money afterwards, right?
No, not necessarily. The process that we passed in our bill, let's say, Jessica, you went to the polls and you didn't have any kind of an ID whatsoever, you would have been allowed to sign an affidavit swearing that you are who you are under punishment of prosecution. So that process would have allowed for a very similar way. You wouldn't have had to have any money out of pocket. But under this process, we're just not sure how that's going to happen. I would much rather have it be at the polling place where you have people who are focused on voting, as opposed to a long line of people who are at the DMV for all kinds of processes, and now they're just trying to hurry to get people to get their ID, whether or not they have shown their citizenship certificate or whatever. I guess that'll be up to us to decide.
Is this the last word on Act 10?
Yes.
Well,
I mean, in my mind it is. I mean, we have seen in every process, we've had, a recall election all about it. We have had 2012 where Republicans were given the chance to come back in charge in the state Senate. The Assembly was affirmed in its position. We now go forward where Governor Walker is running on his reforms, billions of dollars in savings, thousands of jobs saved. No, I remember at the Finance Committee, we had teachers and public employees coming up saying, I'm going to go bankrupt, I'm going to lose my home. Trust me, if there were cases where someone went bankrupt because of Act 10, we would have already heard about it. So a whole lot of hyperbole and exaggeration. Now we have an election that is going to be focused, hopefully, on the economy moving forward, which is creating jobs, opening small businesses, trying to grow our economy. The only people who are focused in the past seem to be two groups: big union bosses who want forced dues to pay for their political participation, and Mary Burke, who benefits from it. That's it.
do you support expanding Act 10 to police and firefighters?
I think Act 10 works as it is right now. If there's a compelling reason to do that, I would look at the facts, but as of right now, I think Act 10 works well as we passed it.
So you're open to it, but you're not advocating for it?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, I always want to be open enough to say, hey, if facts change, or if there's some reason, of course. But don't forget, under the law that we passed, every single new hire has to pay toward their pension and their health care. So that's already seeing a lot of fiscal savings as people choose to retire, people switch departments, all those kind of things. So the savings are already accruing to local governments. So I think that is not as compelling as it was maybe before as it would be today.
If Republicans win in November and Governor Walker's reelected, will you guys go after right-to-work legislation?
It's not high on my list. I will say, in all honesty, that, of course, when I was a freshman in 2005 or 2006, I sent out a letter raising money on behalf of the Wisconsin Right to Work Committee. So I have always believed in the idea of saying that people should have the right to join a union if they choose, but not be compelled to do so. But also, with all honesty saying that, I just don't think it's the time in Wisconsin to have that happen. I think that we have seen that in the private sector, there are a lot of good partnerships between employers and unions. In the public sector, it was the opposite. They were spending all of their money trying to elect people who would give them bigger raises. That's not how it works in the private sector. So I just don't think it'll probably happen.
So it's on your list?
No.
It's
Which
not
thing?
high on your list?
No, I mean, which thing?
The right to work?
No, it's not on my list at all. I mean, it's not something that I intend to pursue next session. I mean, I just want to be honest and say I support the idea. I don't have a problem with it, but it's just not one of the things that I think is top on our list.
Do you think right-to-work would make Wisconsin a more attractive place to businesses?
Data has obviously shown that in states that allow free association, where you're not compelled to be a member of a union, they have higher rates of employment. I think that we are seeing that the private sector union movement is morphing in many ways. They have to be much more of a partner with business, or people choose to move to either a different state or a different country. So hopefully over time, we can get the idea of having compulsory union membership, not something that's mandated. I just don't support that. I think that if you want to join a union, that's fine. If you don't want to join a union, I certainly think you shouldn't be required to. That's in essence what we have with Act 10. If you want to join a union, you have every right to do so. If you don't want to, you can't be compelled.
The Supreme Court also unanimously upheld the domestic partner registry. Is it time for people to just stop fighting over gay marriage and just let it happen?
No, I don't think so. I still support the idea that marriage is between one man and one woman. The voters of Wisconsin spoke. I think that we are seeing, in many ways, society is changing. I respect that. I think people are becoming much more tolerant, which is really what the domestic partner registry was all about. It was saying that there are certain things that a compelling case has been made for. If you want to visit each other in the hospital, if you want to have the right to, hold property together, some things like that. I don't have issues with those things. I just think that what marriage means to society should be remain where it is today. Maybe I'm in the minority. I don't know. I still think I'm in the majority. But I certainly think that domestic partner registry is not something that is a high priority for me either way. For those who get to utilize it, I think that's good for them. I think it's fine, and that's why a unanimous Supreme Court found that way. It's probably okay for society. Any other questions? Have a good day. Enjoy your summer.
Thanks.
Thank you.